Let's begin with a remarkable diplomatic tableau. Former President Trump hosting Benjamin Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago just as the ICC issues an arrest warrant for the Israeli leader. Dr. Miller, how does this setting frame the global stakes?
It's a crystallization of U.S. Israel solidarity, but it also signals disregard for international legal norms. The optics matter. Trump leveraging this moment spotlights the divide between national interests and supranational justice mechanisms.
And yet, there's proactive diplomacy at play. Ceasefire negotiations are underway, giving the event a veneer of peace building. But does hosting Netanyahu under ICC threat risk U.S. credibility?
Absolutely. While the alliance projects strength, it raises questions about selective justice. The U.S. risks undermining institutions like the ICC, which could set a precedent for future leaders to evade accountability.
Turning to a SWOT analysis, the U.S. Israel alliance is a clear strength, reinforcing diplomatic leverage. But what about the perceived weaknesses, like undermining the ICC's credibility?
Weaknesses here are profound. By sidelining the ICC, the U.S. signals that powerful allies can operate above international law. This could embolden not only Israel but other states to flout legal norms, eroding global trust.
Opportunities do exist. Brokering a regional ceasefire or even a hostage release could yield significant humanitarian and strategic gains. Yet, the threats aren't trivial.
Indeed, the most acute threat is the erosion of the ICC's legitimacy, potentially opening the door to future violations by other actors. Domestically, there's the risk of backlash over perceived double standards in justice.
Deploying the MOST framework, let's clarify the mission. Advancing U.S. strategic interests while mediating Middle East peace. What are the core objectives in this scenario?
Securing a ceasefire tops the list, followed by maintaining a robust alliance with Israel and managing the optics of defying the ICC. Each objective requires careful balancing of diplomatic capital and public perception.
And how does strategy manifest? Are we seeing deliberate sidelining of international courts and a focus on humanitarian optics?
Exactly. The strategy leverages high-level meetings and media framing to spotlight peace efforts, while quietly pushing the ICC out of the diplomatic equation through sanctions and rhetorical delegitimization.
Let's delve into the SPEAR framework. Strategy here seems to normalize controversial diplomacy under the guise of peace building. Can you elaborate on the processes involved?
Certainly. Bilateral summits and high-profile negotiations serve as process anchors. Simultaneously, the U.S. imposes sanctions on ICC judges, an unprecedented move, while managing public perception via selective media access.
Execution includes symbolic gestures like floating a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. How effective are these in shaping both domestic and international narratives?
Symbolism carries weight. The Nobel nomination reframes controversy as statesmanship, redirecting focus from legal challenges to peace prospects. However, global reaction remains mixed, tilting between skepticism and cautious optimism.
Stepping into SARP analysis, the immediate result is progress in ceasefire talks and a sidelined ICC, but protests have erupted. What's your assessment of the long-term reputational risks?
Short-term diplomatic gains are offset by reputational liabilities. The U.S. reinforces its image of exceptionalism, but international partners may question its commitment to global norms, possibly weakening multilateral alliances.
So, while the purpose is to reinforce strategic alliances, could this approach backfire if global trust erodes?
Precisely. If the U.S. appears to cherry-pick when to respect international law, it may face resistance in future coalitions or diplomatic negotiations, potentially diminishing its influence in shaping global order.
A PESTO analysis uncovers political and legal complexities. Politically, the move highlights U.S. unilateralism and selective enforcement. What are the deeper legal implications?
Legally, undermining the ICC's authority sets a dangerous precedent. It could embolden not only state actors, but also non-state actors who view international law as optional, increasing global instability.
Let's not overlook the economic and technological aspects. Can a peace deal stabilize regional markets? And how is digital diplomacy shaping narratives here?
Absolutely. Economic stabilization hinges on successful negotiations. On the tech front, Digital platforms and curated media shape public opinion, amplifying either the legitimacy or the controversy of these diplomatic maneuvers.
Switching gears to the Texas flood disaster, we saw rapid FEMA activation that undoubtedly saved lives. Yet, FEMA's weakened long-term preparedness loomed large. Dr. Patel, how did these elements play out on the ground?
The initial federal response was swift, but prior budget cuts meant critical infrastructure, like sirens and sensors, was lacking. Local volunteers filled gaps, but delayed evacuations led to higher casualties.
So even with robust local mobilization, federal retrenchment created vulnerabilities? Does this set a concerning precedent for future disasters?
It does. The lack of sustained investment in preparedness leaves communities exposed. Each disaster becomes a test, often a failed one, of whether decentralized, state-led responses can truly protect lives.
A SWOT lens reveals both strengths, like rapid FEMA action, and glaring weaknesses, such as reduced preparedness due to funding cuts. How do these factors interact during acute crises?
Strengths and weaknesses collide. Quick FEMA deployment saves some, but chronic underfunding undermines resilience. For example, the absence of early warning systems in Kirk County directly contributed to delayed evacuations and over 100 deaths.
Are there opportunities here for reform, or do threats like recurring disasters and reduced federal support outweigh them?
There's public demand for transparency and reform. However, without restoring federal capacity, threats like deregulation and climate change-driven disasters may continue to overwhelm local and state systems.
Applying MOST and SPEAR, the federal mission seems to be shifting: minimize footprint and promote state-led recovery. How did this strategy influence FEMA's execution and outcomes?
The optics of federal activation masked a substantive policy of withdrawal. FEMA was present, but aid was limited and short-lived. The focus on state responsibility left many without adequate support, prolonging recovery timelines.
Symbolic gestures like presidential site visits garnered headlines, but did they translate into real relief or just political capital?
Mostly the latter. Symbolism created the impression of action, but substantial aid lagged. The gap between media coverage and on-the-ground support fueled public frustration and policy backlash.
SARP and PESTEL analyses highlight wider implications: political tension between federal and state roles, economic burdens, and technological gaps. What are the social and environmental stakes here?
Socially, the disaster exposed inequities as underserved communities bore the brunt of delayed evacuation and limited aid. Environmentally, Flash Flood Alley remains vulnerable, especially as climate change intensifies storm cycles.
Legally, FEMA's reduced capacity tests the boundaries of federal obligations under the Stafford Act. Are we seeing a new normal for disaster governance?
Potentially. If decentralization continues without adequate resources, we risk institutionalizing a two-tiered system where only well-resourced states can respond effectively, further deepening national divides.